Just the thought of being stalked by some unknown stranger hiding in the shadows is too much for most to imagine. But for some, this isn't a nightmarish story, but a horrifying reality. Here are 3 true stories of people who were mercilessly stalked. Last winter, something happened to me that really freaked me out. I work in Chicago, but live in Columbus, Ohio. I commute home every other weekend. I've been doing this for about 4 years, so I pretty much have my routes down. I choose to drive because flying is just too much money and hassle. On my way from Illinois to Ohio, I take a quick and boring highway route, and the way back is slightly more complex, following Route 23. Anyways, last January I needed to be in the office on Monday. I usually work from home. So I left at 2 a.m., which would get me to work at 7:30 or 8 a.m. after changing at my apartment. I am very used to the route and know exactly where the rest stops are and gas stations with the decent coffee. The first rest stop I stopped at was the one on Route 23, about an hour out. I stopped there because it was a good 2 hours until the next one. I used the urinal, and written on top in very neat handwriting it said, "I want to suck your you-know-what." 1:18:11:30 p.m. About 3 hours ago today. Above the urinal, on the wall, was a pretty decent cartoon of such action being performed. As I glanced up and down the wall, I found more lewd sayings and creepy drawings just like the first. Being that this was a public rest stop, I didn't really think too much about it at the time. After finishing up and returning to the parking lot, I noticed that there were several trucks parked in the lot, and I kind of wondered if it was one of them, and if they'd found their good time. I got in my car and drove off. On my rear window, I have one of those stickers that says, "Ohio State Dad." I stopped for more coffee at a Speedway, and then got on US 30 heading west. Just after I pulled onto I-75, I pulled into the next rest area. I walked in and was shocked at what was written on the walls. It was clearly the same cartoonist, but this time, the cartoon pictured a vivisection. Very realistic organs were next to a torso and a kneeling man with his face fully entrenched in the empty body cavity. I have to admit, this kind of scared me, but I really had to pee. And sure enough, when I got to the urinal, there was another disturbing message scrawled across the top. "I want to rip apart your guts. I want to eat your intestines." January 19th, 2:45. I looked at my watch. It was just after 4:30. I was gaining on this guy. I couldn't stop thinking about this. I think the fact that the drawings were so professional and the spelling was so good that it creeped me out even more. I drove on. I watched as I passed cars and trucks. I tried to see in the windows, but it was still dark. I was passed only twice, once by a big BMW and once by an older Chevy Impala. Both had Indiana plates. About an hour and a half later, I was approaching the next rest stop. I didn't really have to go, but I had to see if there was more graffiti. I was the only car in the parking lot, though there were a couple of trucks. Nervously, I walked to the bathroom. I am not ashamed to admit that I was more than a little afraid, and that I had gotten the wrench out of the toolbox I carried with me on these trips. The second I hit the lobby, I could smell feces. I almost turned around, but I had to look. I walked into the men's room. The lights are automatic, and they flickered on. In foot-high letters, written in crap. At least, I think that's what it was anyway. It said, "Almost there, Ohio Dad." I almost fainted right there. The thick smell of crap and the fact that somehow I felt that they were talking to me. Ohio Dad? Ohio State Dad? Like my sticker? I stepped back, and to my horror, I noticed that something, like a raccoon or a groundhog, had been ripped apart, and its carcass and guts were laying next to the stall. I got the hell out of there. Once outside, I felt better, but as I walked to my car, I heard a whispered bark, and I swear some muffled laughter. I looked around, but it was dark, and there were bushes and trees everywhere. I didn't want to run because I knew if I did, I would panic. I fast walked, got in my car, started it, and got on the road as quickly as I could. As soon as my phone had synced up, I called 911. I reported the vandalism at the last rest stop. They took the call like it was no big deal, and I didn't elaborate. I was about 5 minutes from Indiana. Several more minutes after crossing through Indiana, I noticed emergency flashers on the side of the road up ahead. It was that Impala that passed me hours ago. A guy was standing with his thumb out just ahead of his car, illuminated by the headlights. It was maybe 18 degrees, and he only wore a hoodie. He looked cold. I almost stopped, but as I slowed, I noticed dark brown stains on his yellow sweatshirt, and his hands were filthy with something dark. Perhaps it was just grease from trying to fix his car, but perhaps it could have also been feces and blood. I sped up, and his thumb turned into the finger, and his other hand joined in it, and he screamed at me. His mouth split, it seemed too wide, and his teeth looked too small, like there were just too many of them. I downshifted, jumped on the accelerator, and took off. I called 911 again and reported a stranded motorist. I didn't make a big deal about it, just gave the mile marker number. What I didn't tell them was that he had screamed, "F you, Ohio." Needless to say, I no longer take that secluded shortcut. It adds more time to my commute, but I would just rather be where there are a lot of other people. Later on, I tried looking for any mention of the vandalism or the stranded motorist, but found nothing. Be careful out there on those secluded roads. My story takes place in the spring of 2000. I had recently gotten my first puppy, a very longed-for contribution to my life. I was 20 and had just moved into a dog-friendly apartment building and was enjoying the hell out of finally having a little pup in my life. I started walking him several times a day and soon interacted with lots of new people who also walked their dogs the same places I did. There were many really nice people that I got to know. And then there was Hugo. He was a 45-ish bloke with a shaven head and a way of talking to you as if he was your best and oldest friend in the world. I didn't want to be rude and tell him to stay away, not at first, but when I started getting texts from him without ever even giving him my number, I told him to please leave me alone. He would inform me, as if it was perfectly normal, that he would sit and wonder if I was home, and drive by to check if my car was in the parking lot. If it wasn't, he admitted to feeling jealous and badly done by, wondering who I was with. I started avoiding the trails that I knew he often walked, and instead took my dog to a forest area outside the city, where he would play and run and have a great time. I started getting emails from Hugo, where he held long, one-sided conversations about why we made the perfect couple. I ignored the emails. Then I got letters, no stamp, in the mail, where he informed me about where he had seen me, what I had been wearing, and where my 4-year-old niece went to daycare. She looks just like you. Now, this was where I started to freak out a bit and went to the police for support. The policeman informed me that even if his behavior was indeed disturbing, he had made no actual real threat, and therefore the police could do nothing apart from phoning him and telling him off. I figured they must have done that because the texting and emailing stopped. Eventually, months passed and I forgot about the whole thing, until one evening in the beginning of September. I was babysitting my niece and decided to take her and the dog to my favorite spot along the forest trail. There's a bench and a fire pot, and we could bring hot dogs and cocoa and have a nice evening outdoors. My niece was halfway into her second hot dog, and I was over by the riverside, throwing sticks into the water for my little dog to retrieve, when I suddenly realized that my niece was talking to someone, giggling and laughing. I turned around to see her sitting on the lap of Hugo. He was bouncing her around, and she laughed and smiled at him. I can't describe the feeling that overcame me, but I heard myself say, "Put her down right now," and started walking towards them. I didn't run, as if afraid to spook him and cause him to try and run off with her, and also, I didn't want to scare the child. He must have been watching me, following me, without me noticing. I thought, the sick monster. "Such a pretty little princess," he said. "She's got your smile." "Come to me," I said to my niece, but then his grip around her tightened, and she stopped giggling and looked at me with disbelief. My dog, now sensing that something had changed, that there was some sort of threat in the air, and started to bark dementedly. "Go play with the dog, princess, and your aunt and I will take a little walk. Isn't that right, darling?" he added, a thin veil covering an open threat. "Okay," the little girl agreed, and he reached out a hand to me, grabbing hold of my arm before letting go of the child. "Go play," I said to her, trying to sound normal. "Go play with the dog, but stay clear of the water. I'll be right back." At this, Hugo snickered and yanked me with him down the trail. "So, how come you're here this evening?" I asked, trying to sound casual and not scared out of my mind. "You told them I was a perv. You told the police I was a stalker. I'm just looking out for you, don't you see that? And you're just an ungrateful, deceiving little brat." "I didn't realize you were looking out for me," I said, unsure of how to handle the situation, waiting for an opportunity to run. "Of course. If I wanted to make sure you didn't try and do anything stupid on our date, I would have taken the little girl with us. See, I'm no monster. I'm your protector, your soulmate. So I let her be. I'm nice like that." At this, he stopped in his tracks, turned around to face me, and let go of my arm to touch my face. Before I knew what I was doing, I had shoved the heel of my hand directly in his trachea, the way we had practiced so many times during my conscription year, but never thought I would use in real life. Never hesitate. If you need to do this, then do it with all you've got. There are no second chances, our instructor had said, and I apparently paid better attention than I knew. To my surprise, Hugo went down to his knees, a stunned look on his face, both hands clutching his throat. Run, I thought. Run! I ran back to where I had left my niece and dog. I snatched her up from the ground and ran with the dog barking by my side to the car. I threw the now crying child and the dog into the car and sped off. No seatbelts, no child seats, nothing. I drove to the same police station I had visited once before and actually got to see the same policeman. They didn't find him where I had left him, but retrieved my bag that had been left at the scene, as well as the dog lead and my niece's sunglasses. My niece had no idea that he wasn't a good guy, and no one could testify as to what had happened. He was never brought in, and I never got the ending I wanted. It took a long time until I finally stopped looking over my shoulder every time I went out running. Even longer before I could open my door when the doorbell rang, without first reaching for my pepper spray. I haven't seen or heard from him since that day, and I truly hope we never meet again. A week or so before my 10th birthday, I walked to the corner store with a $5 bill and picked up a jar of ragu for my mom. On my way home, a man I had never seen before fell in step with me and began talking. "Hi," he said cheerfully. "My name is Dr. Ramsey. I'm a pediatrician. Do you know what a pediatrician is?" I walked along silently, not replying, and fervently hoping he would take that as a sign he should leave me alone. Subtleties were not his strong suit, though, because he kept right on chatting. "Are your parents looking for a pediatrician for you? Of course you're almost a big girl now. You'll be needing another kind of doctor soon, won't you? That's okay though, they can still bring you to me until then. What's your name? You have beautiful hair. I was just on my way to get some suckers for the candy jar in my office. Do you like suckers? Thankfully, we were nearing my house, so I ran forward, up the back steps, and into the kitchen door. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a very long, very scary ordeal. It didn't take long after that for Dr. Ramsey to begin showing up. At first, it seemed benign enough, at least to a little kid. He would drive by nearly every day, smiling and waving. I told my mom, who said maybe he was on his way home from work. But then the phone calls began. My dad called me into the living room and sat me down. He asked about the day Dr. Ramsey had followed me home and asked if I had talked to him. He said I wasn't in trouble, but that I needed to tell him the truth. I told him no, and he asked if I was sure. Could I be forgetting something? I told him no again, and he frowned, then asked, "Then how does he know your name?" I didn't know. It turns out that was not all he knew. He knew my sister's name as well. Pretty soon, neither my sister or I were allowed to answer the phone. He called several times a day. At first, neither of us knew what he was saying. Then, one night, one of my brothers told us he was telling my parents that he was going to hurt me, and later, my sister. Things got complicated after that. My dad had called the police, but as this was before there were any stalking laws, there wasn't a lot they could do. They told my parents to call back if he tried anything. My dad then called a friend of his from back in the day, who happened to be a cop. For the next month, my dad's friend escorted me to and from school. Suddenly, life as I knew it came to a screeching halt. I couldn't walk to school alone, I couldn't play outside, I couldn't walk to Super America, sort of like a 7-Eleven for those who don't know. When any sort of access to me was completely denied, things escalated. It was around this time he began threatening my sister as well. Then, one afternoon, my sister, two of my brothers, my mom and I were in the kitchen. One of my brothers had seen a glimpse of someone in the garage, and whoever it was had seen him too. Dr. Ramsey came bolting out of the garage, my brothers chasing after him. They ran all the way to Cherokee Park, where he lost them in the trees. My parents called the police again, but nothing came of it. The only information they had was a description and a name that was almost certainly fake. A couple weeks later, we woke to find our dog hanging from the side porch. She was a gorgeous saddleback German Shepherd, born the same day I was. We were all devastated. The cops said there was no evidence it was him and ruled it accidental, but none of us believed that. His phone calls became more informative in the meantime. He would talk about who was home and who wasn't. If my brother would say my dad was home, he would tell him who was really in the house. He also would talk about the house itself, about the window in the kitchen he could easily open with a knife from the outside, even when it was locked, and about the French doors connecting the living room to the side porch, and how the lock could be finagled from the outside if you jiggled it just right. That night, my dad put some carpenter nails in the bottom of the French doors until he could get a new lock ordered. Later on, my parents had to go to a company event for my dad's work. My older brothers were at Saints West roller skating rink. My sister was on the phone with her best friend. My little brother was asleep on the floor, and I was watching TV. It was really late. Suddenly, the top of the French doors swung inward, and within a few milliseconds, before the nails in the bottom caused them to snap back, I could see his silhouette. In a frenzy, we ran up the stairs. About halfway up, we realized our little brother was still asleep on the living room floor. As quietly as we could, we slipped back down the stairs to get him. We all went into our bedroom and didn't turn on the light. This way we could see outside. We watched out the window for a while, and when we didn't find him, we crept down the hall to our brother's room to look. We looked down and could see someone standing at the back door. He knocked loudly. "What do you want?" my sister asked out the window. He stepped back and said, "Is this the Mercy residence? I have a pizza for delivery. Can you come to the door?" She scoffed at him, declaring that she wasn't stupid. She could see he didn't have a pizza and she was calling the cops. At that, he left. A short while later, my brothers returned home. We told them what had happened, and they walked around the yard, watching for him. They came back in, and things settled down. By now, we'd pretty much given up on calling the cops because it never helped, so we just went back in, each of us carrying a knife from the kitchen just in case, except for my youngest brother, who was still asleep. Eventually, one of my brothers went into the kitchen to get a bowl of cereal as a snack. You know that sensation you get when you can just feel someone watching you? Yeah, he had that in spades. He kept looking around the kitchen, through the doorway into the dining room, at the windows. He didn't see anything, but he could still feel eyes on him, so he went closer to the door to try and see better. The kitchen lights were reflecting on the windows of the door, so he still couldn't see. He stepped closer, then closer again, until he was right up to the door, then cupped his hands on either side of his head so he could see. There, on the other side of the window pane, was Dr. Ramsey, smiling back at him. He turned to yell for my older brothers, and when he looked back, he was gone. They went out again to look for him, but didn't see him. The next night, we were at the table playing Crazy Eights, and my brother was restless. My sister asked him what was wrong, and he said he always felt like any minute now there would be a boom, boom, boom on a door or a window. Almost immediately after he finished that sentence, boom, boom, boom on the window right behind him. In the chaos, the two eldest ran out, but he was already gone. A couple of weeks later, I was at school, and we were outside on the playground during recess. I was swinging upside down when I saw that now familiar blue Ford Galaxy cruising by, moving slowly. There he was, smiling and waving. He called my name, and I ran to the teacher and told her. The school had been told all about him, and she took me inside right away and called my mom. That same day, my mom had gotten a call from the school office asking her to verify that my dad was picking me up, as he'd called to say he was on his way. He wasn't. Not long after that, I woke up one night thirsty. I went down to the kitchen for a drink, and there, sitting alone in the dark, was my dad. On the table, a gun. He was tired of the police waiting until Dr. Ramsey tried something. He was tired of his children being terrorized, and he was tired of being afraid every time he left for work that something would happen to one of us while he was gone. I sat with him for a time, watching, before he sent me back to bed. These events and many more took place over a period of around 18 months. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. He had vanished from our lives. The phone calls, the drive-by with the creepy waves, everything. For a long time, during and after the Dr. Ramsey days, I would have a recurring nightmare in which I would wake up to find him standing over me as I slept. It took a long time before I felt like a kid again. It wasn't until years later that I found out that when he was calling, Dr. Ramsey would tell my parents that he was going to rape and kill me, and later my sister too, and that there was nothing they could do about it. I don't know what happened to him when he disappeared. I don't know if he was in a car wreck, locked in prison, in a coma, but sometimes I wonder if that wait ended for my dad when he was sitting in the dark kitchen that one night. I don't know, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to.